Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good to be together this morning. How are you this morning? It's a sleepy room. You guys are sleepy. What's wrong with you? I'm worried about you. What a beautiful day outside. Come on, guys, wake up. You got a whole day here. Well, I'm going to be finishing a series that we've done a number of weeks ago that we affectionately called the E word, that's like a cartoon curse word there. If you see, you know that, like, how many people in this room are old enough to know who the Flintstones even are? Okay, oh, wow, okay, all right. It transcended generations. I didn't know that, okay. So, that's how they curse, right, with anyway, okay, but because what we've been talking about is evangelism, which inside of the church and outside the church is kind of a negative, word generally. It basically denotes like proselytizing and forcing people to believe things they don't want to believe or whatever. And so we've been talking about how what the scriptures make a case for is that what it means to share your faith is to bring good news. And really to have an attitude and a heart of hospitality and care and to bring good news to people. And so we've been talking about that over weeks and how we can sort of reframe the way that we understand how our faith works and engaging other folks. So I'll finish that this week. We'll finish. And next week, we'll jump into another series, which I'll tell you about, because I think it's going to be a really fun series. And hopefully it will stretch us a little bit intellectually. It's I get to be a nerd and use some of my philosophy training, so I'm very excited because it turns out that's not useful pretty much ever. So this will be like my moment to shine is coming up with my philosophy background. But we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll tell you a little story that really impacted the way I understand my faith and what it means to talk about the faith that I have in Jesus, because many of you know I wasn't raised in church. I've no church background. I had an experience with God that transformed my life and made it so I'm doing this. And it was when I was in university. I was actually doing some graduate work around philosophy. And I was talking to a Hindu student, a guy from India, and, because Indians generally find each other. And some of you are like, that's what Jay is. I've been wondering this whole time. And so we were talking, and he was surprised to discover, specifically with my last name, that I'm a follower of Jesus. And we were talking about faith, and we made an agreement. He was a super bright guy. I really liked him. We made an agreement that we would both read different religious books that we would recommend to each other, and then we'd get together and talk about it. We get a cup of coffee and talk about it. And so I was reading any number of different Hindu texts. He's reading the Bible. And we're going back and forth over a few years. And one day was different than any other days. We sat down, and he said to me, I actually figured this out. I said, what did you figure out? He goes, I figured out that this Bible you're having me read, this is not a religious book. And I was like, oh, yeah, it is. It actually is. That's what the Bible is, actually. And he's like, no, it's not. This is not a religious book. I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, I've read all kinds of religious books. We're reading religious books together. I'm giving you different religious books that I know of as a Hindu. This is not a religious book. This book that you're having me read is a history book. This book makes a case for what all of human history is. How the world began, how God has reached into and grabbed a hold of people's lives, how he's interacted even with nations. And this is making a unique claim on what history is about. And in this history, different people are being asked to take their story and place it inside of this story. That's what this is. This is not a religious book. Religious books tell people what to do and what not to do. What to do on certain days and how to behave and how not to behave. This is not that. There's some of that in there. But this is a history book asking you to join your story to this story. And as I'm looking at my Hindu friend, I was like, thank you for the theological lesson. Because he's right. That is what the claim of the scriptures are. That is what the claim is and has been the claim of people who follow Jesus. And it is one of those things that sets apart the way that we think about our life with Jesus than many other religious paradigms that are about how you behave and what you should do and what you should not do, versus will you take your little story and stick it inside of this larger story? To take what the days of your life and what story are you joining? What narrative do you think your life is supposed to be a part of? Because, it only takes a little while to realize your story can't just be about you. The first time that you realize that you're not going to play in the NFL, or you're not going to be a rock star, is the first time you realize, wait a second. Some of you were like, Jay, there's still time for me. Just stop stealing my dreams. Okay, sure. By the way, even the rock stars and the NFL players realize it's not about them eventually. The first time you realize that, the whole story, the whole world is not going to revolve around me, if you haven't figured that out, you're a sociopath and a narcissist, and there's help for you. But you tend to hit a wall, and then you have to ask, okay, so what is my life for? Where does this story connect to another story that gives my life meaning? My life doesn't have enough meaning with enough sex or money, or I can't get high enough or stay high long enough to feel like my life has meaning. Again, some of you are begging to differ, well, that was a joke. Anyway, so you're like, did you know that for a fact? Because so many of the methods people have is actually trying to escape reality instead of actually live into it. So the minute you realize that, you're like, okay, so I'm supposed to join some kind of story, I suppose, and there's all kinds of stories people make claims of, and there's ways that we feel like we're creating those ourselves, or we're connecting with other ones, and we're sort of judging one another in the way that they sort of are making their life work versus the way you're making your life work. And to be fair, the story of being a follower of Jesus does get a bad rap in our current cultural moment. I literally just came back from some meetings in D.C. I flew in last night. And, if you've never been to D.C. or that area, it's like if you throw a ball in the middle of the city, you're going to hit a lawyer. Eventually, they'll just bounce into probably 3 or 4 lawyers on a crowded street. And so, it's a particular place, as a particular kind of way that power gets brokered. And so even if you fly in and out of there, you bump into people of this ilk. And so I was flying in, the person sitting next to me, in a really nice suit. I was actually also wearing a suit, for what it's worth. And I was going to some important meetings, and so I was tricking them. They were like, well, let's go. Anyway. And said, oh, well, what do you do? And I said, oh, well, I'm actually a pastor. And by the way, this is like the worst moment in my day, many days. Because you just watch people stiffen up. He just stiffened up, and he was like, oh, okay. It's like, well, what was that? What do you mean, oh, okay? And he was like, yeah, it's fine. I don't want to offend you. I don't know you. I said, no, say what you want to say. He goes, well, I just know a lot about you. I said, you do you? He says, yeah, I know a lot about you, like right now. I said, what do you know about me? He said, you are pro-war, anti-gay, you are intolerant and judgmental, if you're the kind of pastor I imagine you are. And so I just put my headphones in. No, no, of course not. I'm not going to do that. I have a sickness inside of me where I have to engage people in moments like this. And anyway, I was like, wow, that is fascinating. And he had a little, he actually looked very dapper. He had a little red handkerchief in his nice navy blue suit. I said, well, I know some things about you. And he goes, do you? I said, you have a red handkerchief. That means you're a cannibal. He says, that's ridiculous. I said, no more ridiculous than what you just said to me. And I actually do know another thing about you. Is one of the things you claimed that I am, you certainly are, which is judgmental. And he paused and he went, that's definitely true. And it led to an interesting conversation, which I could tell you about some other time. If you come to the welcome lunch, I'll tell you the end. But do you discover that everybody's doing some version of this? Sizing each other up, giving people little true-false tests to figure out if I can get these 3 pieces of information, I can fill in the rest of the story. Once I know these 3 things about you, I can tell you everything else about you. Anybody who likes it when people do that to you? You this feels great. And yet we're doing it to each other all the time, and what we're really doing is describing a worldview we have. We have a way of seeing the world. We have lenses that we're wearing, we have glasses we're wearing, by which we're interpreting all of reality. That's a worldview or a paradigm. I can't go into this too long now, but we'll spend the next number of weeks looking at 9 key paradigms that exist out there of how people understand and interpret the world. That's what we're going to do for a number of weeks. That's where my philosophy training will come in handy for solely this time. And we'll look at some different philosophies and paradigms by which people understand the world. My hope is for us to understand one another in such a way that we might be able to increase dialogue and have generosity toward each other, specifically as we consider a life with Jesus. But that's not what we'll do today. As we just kept going, we were discussing different things. And I said something to him that I think will be relevant to the passage we just read, and we'll look at that briefly. As I said to him, I live within a world that God is orchestrating our lives, and he does not live in that world in his mind. I said, I believe that it's possible that God placed me next to you on this plane today. And he went, I don't live in that world. I don't believe that. I believe most of my life is just haphazard and is up to how awesome I can be on any given day. And I said, well, that sounds exhausting. It sounds wearisome. Now, I don't know, when I say those words, I believe that God orchestrates our life. What does that do to you? Just here this morning, is it possible God placed you in this room this morning to hear something, to think about something, to try something on you've never tried on before, to allow maybe your paradigm to tilt slightly toward a life with God that maybe you never imagined possible? Well, that's the story that I just want us to look at. And frankly, the text basically preaches itself. So I'm going to mostly just read it and say a few things. Does that sound fine? Sometimes you read Bible texts and you're like, what in the world is going on here? This one is pretty straightforward. And yet some of the things it's saying are so poignant and so powerful that they help us think about what it is to have a life with God and what it is to share that life with others. But more importantly, how do we begin to believe that maybe God is orchestrating every day of our life? He's placing us next to people so that we might learn and offer something hopeful to others. The book of Acts, if you've not read the book of Acts much, is the story after the resurrection of Jesus. The church is going out, mostly just interacting with Jewish folks coming into a life with Jesus. But at this tipping point in Acts, we're starting to see where the gospel, the hope that's found in Jesus, is going outside the ethnic barriers of just the Jewish people. Now Gentiles are starting to be pulled in. And it's kind of a tipping point in the book of Acts. And this is the story that just drops right into the middle of that. I'll start in verse 26. It says, "Now an angel of the Lord said to Philip, 'Go south to the road, the desert road that goes down from Jerusalem to Gaza.' So he started out, and on his way, he met an Ethiopian eunuch, an important official, in charge of all the treasury of Candace. This man had gone to Jerusalem to worship, and on his way home, he was sitting in his chariot reading the book of Isaiah the prophet. The Spirit told Philip, 'Go to that chariot and stay near it.'" So let's just pause there. This will be interesting to 4 Bible nerds. So if you're one of those 4, you're going to like this part right now. And then the rest of you, I'll tell you when to come back. What's so interesting about this passage is we have some ancient documents that seem to verify the historicity of this moment. There is, in non-biblical sources, stories of how this official went to Jerusalem from a powerful kingdom. And one of the ways that we have verification of this is in some ancient documents, the economy of the places where this entire, effectively, parade went increased as they came through town. In other words, this would be like a motorcade of like a billionaire. And there were likely hundreds of people in procession with this powerful official who makes their way up to Jerusalem from Ethiopia and then back down. And this official is coming back down from Jerusalem and apparently either had procured the Hebrew scriptures or had them ahead of time, and that's why they went to Jerusalem. We don't really know kind of what brought this about, but we can see in some ancient documents that this happened. Like, we can see this specific official going to do this specific thing. So it's kind of an interesting text that we can see that. And it begs the question, what are they doing and how was that trip? Well, we do have some information here that this is a high-level official of a massive kingdom in Ethiopia who is a eunuch. And if you do not know what a eunuch is, there are children here, so I will be careful. But a eunuch is if a part of your body has either been deformed or crushed, but it's more likely that this eunuch is someone who, by their own choice or by the compulsion of another who's powerful, had their genitalia, a specific part of their genitalia, removed. And so that either was because they were in some kind of a slavery scenario or within a household where it was better, at least in the minds of powerful people, to remove that, or they did that to themselves, or they were born in this way. It's likely, and I don't have time to describe, but from the context of this text, that this was a surgical choice, not something that was just handed to them person by birth. And what we know of how the temple worship worked, if this person had gone to the temple, which it seems as though that's what they were doing, going to Jerusalem, that they would not have been given entry to the temple or any part of the temple. In other words, Gentiles had ways they could go near the temple to worship as long as they were ceremonially clean, and it's very unlikely that this person would have been allowed anywhere near any way of worship. So in other words, this very important person travels all the way to the edge of Jerusalem, likely to worship, given that they're carrying around Hebrew scriptures, or to learn about having a life with God, and they're barred entry. They're not allowed to participate. It's possible that even as they would understand the temple, they would be told, "You're not welcome here. You're not welcome here for a bunch of reasons. You're not welcome here because of your racial and ethnic background, and you're not welcome here because of your bodily condition, which would relate directly to how you would probably understand your gender and sexual identity. You're not welcome. You got to go back home. Imagine a world where people would be rejected for any of those attributes. Can you imagine that world? Some of you are like, do you mean this world? Yes, I am referring to this world. Imagine a world where it's like, hey, either because of something that happened to you or because of an accident of where you were born, we're not sure what God wants to do with you. And yet, this person is still seeking God. The scriptures say that he's reading from the scroll of Isaiah. And God had led this one person, Philip, to go find this one person. The Spirit speaks to Philip and says, go down the road. And then when he goes down the road, he says, go stand by that chariot, which, by the way, there's a whole other teaching here on how God leads people prophetically. That it's not always like the whole story. It's like, just do this, then do that, then do that, then do that. It happens in progression. And so go down the road, then go stand by the chariot. And as he's standing by the chariot, this is what it says. Then Philip ran up to the chariot, and he heard the man reading Isaiah the prophet. He's reading it out loud. Do you understand what you are reading? Philip asked. How can I, he said, unless someone explains it to me? So he invited Philip to come up and sit with him. This is the passage of scripture the eunuch was reading. He was led like a sheep to the slaughter, and as a lamb before its shearers is silent, he did not open his mouth. In his humiliation, he was deprived of justice. Who can speak of his descendants? For his life was taken from the earth. Those of you who are Bible scholars know this is referring to Isaiah 53. Isaiah 53 is so directly pointing to Jesus. This is scripture that was written 600 years before Jesus was born, at least 600, it might be a little more. It's so poignantly and so directly pointed at Jesus that Jewish scholars up until like the mid-1900s were convinced that Christians added this to the scroll of Isaiah. Like they were like, there's no way. This so obviously points to Jesus. The Christians must have added it, and our oldest copies of Isaiah were after Jesus' birth, death, and resurrection. And so they were like, you added this to kind of like smuggle in a prophecy. Does that make sense? Well, that was until the Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1942, where this exact passage was found in its full, complete form from before the birth of Christ. Meaning that this was not added, it was prophetically pointing directly to Jesus. If you've not read Isaiah 53, it should blow your mind. It's one of those passages that I think should blow anyone's mind if they're considering a life with God, of how clearly God prophesies who Jesus is and what he will do. And so he's reading this particular passage. Is anybody struck by the timing of all this? It's almost like it's being orchestrated. The guy that gets rejected, who's feeling humiliated and left out, is reading a passage about how God chose to be humiliated. And while he's reading that passage, a random man is sent to him by the unction of the Spirit to hear him saying it and to step into that exact moment. What are the odds? The eunuch asked Philip, tell me please, who is the prophet talking about? Himself or someone else? Then Philip began with that very passage of scripture and told him the good news about Jesus. Two specific people who were being orchestrated by God in very different ways to join a story that's larger than their own. So much so that you and I are reading it thousands of years later. We're reading about how these two people were matched on an app some of you are like, I always knew those were from God, are matched by God to have this conversation. It is astounding. What does this tell us? What does this tell us about who God is and what he's like? It tells us, and by the way, I could show you 10 more stories in just Acts alone of people who are not included, who shouldn't be invited to the party. I can show you 20 more stories through the Gospels where Jesus goes to a particular person in a particular place who has the attributes of the kind of person who is seeking God. And God orchestrates his people to go find that particular one person. What that tells us is that if you're in the room today and you're wondering, does God see me or care about me? And you're seeking him. Now listen, if you're the kind of person who's like, I don't care if there's a God, screw him if he's there, I'm going to do what I want, this might not apply to you. Turns out you're in church, so it's probably not you, unless somebody bribed you to be here with something. But if you're the kind of person who's like, no, if there's a God, and I want to know who he is. If there's a God who might care or might be able to help me with my life, I want to know who that is. Here's what's amazing about this story and so many stories in the Bible, and frankly, so many stories of humans that sit in this room, mine included, that if you're the kind of person who says, if there's a God, I want to know who is. You just say that in your heart even. And you're willing to align yourself in any way to seek after him. God will send you people. Specifically. He will place you in places. Specifically. And if you're the kind of person that says, I love God so much that I want to help others, do not be surprised if he sends you. Specifically to places, because here's what is amazing about this story that they're being invited into. And honestly, I think they're both being invited into it. It's not just a story about the eunuch, it's a story about Philip. They're being invited into a story which is not about how good or righteous or awesome or perfect people can be. They're being invited into a story that tells us a story about how good and loving and kind and generous God is. And how God in his generosity sent his son into the world. For God so loved the world that he gave. He's a generous God. He gave his only begotten son. And that God, like Isaiah 53 says, that one Jesus, suffered and died and took the pain and the suffering of the world upon himself. And lots of people die, but nobody raises from the dead. And he rose again to prove that death was not just in vain. It wasn't just to make a point, but that death was so that anyone who would believe in him would be offered that life. That is the gospel that Philip preaches to this Ethiopian eunuch in that chariot on that road. He says this passage is referring to Jesus. And this Jesus is one that you can come to because there's no barriers. There's no barriers. Everywhere you've looked, there's been a barrier. There is no barriers because God jumped all the barriers. He came to you. Your arm is not long enough to reach to him. You can reach as high as you want. You can be as moral as you want to be. You can't reach to him. And some of you looking at me, you don't know me, you might be new here, you're like, that guy's arms are too long. And they are, by the way. They're disproportionate to my body. So I have pretty long arms, is my point. But my arms are not long enough to reach, but his are long enough to reach to you. And he did this in Jesus Christ. This is the hope that we have in the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is the hope that is offered in a life with God that is not about us, but it's about him. And the challenge is then, with all the barriers removed, will you receive this God who has come for you? That is a story that we're invited into. And here's how I know that eunuch was super excited about this story. Because listen to what happens. As they traveled along the road, this is how the passage ends, they came to some water, and the eunuch said, "Look, here's some water." Phew, this line is really hard for me to read. What can stand in the way of me being baptized? What can stand in the way? Who can stop me? Nobody. I mean, he heard a message of the life that was offered in God that was different than anyone he'd ever heard. The barriers have been broken down. The veil has been torn. The mercy has been extended. There is nothing that stands between you and the mercy of God. And so he has captured this little gospel proclamation. He's like, who can stop me? And I don't know how you would read this next bit, but my impression is that Philip is like, not me. So Philip's like, I think you have a point. So he gave orders. He stopped the chariot. Both Philip and the eunuch went down to the water, and Philip baptized him. Why not right now? Philip's like, I don't know. I can't think of a single reason. Let's do it. They go down. He baptized him. And this is the part that is just awesome that I pray about. When they came up out of the water, the Spirit of the Lord suddenly took Philip away, and the eunuch did not see him again, and he went on his way rejoicing. Teleportation in the Bible. I've gotten to see a lot of cool stuff. Not seen this yet. Not seen teleportation. If I do, you guys will be the first to hear about it. Okay, so he appears in another place, and now Philip's like, I am telling everybody about Jesus. He was sent to a specific person in a specific place at a specific time to speak of Jesus, to draw him into a story that he never even knew was possible. And by the way, to this day, there's an entire Ethiopian church that traces their lineage to this guy. If you've never been in Ethiopia or heard the stories, to this day, there are churches in Ethiopia that are like, yeah, we built churches out of this guy's ministry when he came home. Because he wasn't just a guy who met Jesus. He was a guy who had to tell everyone else. Because the barriers were broken. Life was offered. Hope was extended. Because this is the gospel of Jesus Christ. Not that we have done much, but he has done everything. So, my dear brothers and sisters, followers of Jesus, have you spoken of this good news? Have you thought, maybe just even considered, that God has placed you where he has? Where you work, where you live, the few friends that surround you, maybe even in the family you're in, that God has placed you to speak of this good news, to offer this life that frankly people don't know is life. Sadly, people have twisted up this gospel and made it as though there's all kinds of barriers between them and God. Like if we do all these things just the right way, maybe we can experience the mercy of God. That is not the gospel of Jesus Christ. The gospel of Jesus Christ is he's come for you so that you might have life. Now, it might also mean you got to give him your whole life. Maybe that's the part people don't like as much. That he's given everything for you so that now you give your everything to him. So that's also a barrier, but that's a barrier within you, not within the heart of God. His arms are wide open, will people come home? And I pray for you that you and I would see ourselves as Philip, but it's possible there's a few here today that you have no excuses. The way has been made. The ground is level. And you can just come home. Why don't we stand together?